Hey guys, welcome back to the Intentional Life podcast. Last week, when we were here, we were talking, and after the podcast, we found out about the death of Charlie Kirk. And this is a tough topic to address. All of us have been hugely affected by this, but nevertheless, it's really a topic we should address. Part of being intentional in life is looking into the things that are uncomfortable, maybe even vulnerable, and just talking about it. Last week when we were talking, actually it was right within the window of when Charlie Kirk was shot. Maybe you remember where you were at when you found out about that news. I was sitting here and got a call from my brother, and he said Charlie Kirk had been shot. My heart just absolutely sank. Sank for Charlie, sank for our country, sank for the unknown. And I think it's just a good topic that actually John brought up that we should talk about. And I'm excited to be able to talk about that here today. So, John, where were you at when you found out this last week about that?
Man, I think after our podcast, we were doing some family stuff, and I think I heard he was shot, and I was like, "Oh my goodness." And, I instantly was thinking like, "Well, like, how bad was it?" So I started doing some research, and some of those videos started to circulate around, and I caught a very, very gruesome version of him being shot, and I won't go into a whole lot of description here on the podcast for people who that might be a little bit queasy here, but it was pretty gruesome. And I don't think I've ever been as impacted by something I've seen on media, social media before than seeing that. Like I was like, you can watch movies and stuff and you're like you see something that's kind of brutal or gruesome, but you're like you kind of categorize it as like this is just a movie, this is but I was just like my word, this just happened a little bit ago, and it's already circulating, and this is gruesome,
Mhm.
and it's in front of all these people, and when I saw it, I was like, "There's no way he's making out alive from this."
Mhm.
But I remember just kinda constantly checking the, the media to see, like, did he die? And then it was like, I think we were at the park with the family, and I saw, like, he actually had passed away, and I I felt like I couldn't function. I was like, "What in the world?" Like, "What what's the motive behind this? What is going on? Like, why did this transpire?" I mean, was his wife and kids there? I mean, my mind was racing, and, yeah, it was definitely one of the most devastating things to happen, and then just to be able to witness that so quickly. I couldn't imagine being on campus. I have since had many conversations with people about this, and I know of people who have close friends that were there at that event and how it was just, like, horrifying. I don't know how you would actually quite recover from seeing that, especially if you were someone who looked up to and respected Charlie Kirk, but yeah,
Mhm.
for those listening in, maybe you can kinda recollect where you were. What we wanna do today is not necessarily go through the facts. I'm sure you've gotten some of that, like with the the person that killed him, the gun, the ammunition, what was engraved, and all of some of those facts you probably can find online. Not really trying to dive into much, like, the motive, and I know there's been a lot of talk too of, like, was he left wing? Was he MAGA? Was he this or that? I think some of those facts have actually been pretty clearly delineated as of now. But the, thing that we wanna talk about is, like, what does it look like to lead from this point? What is I think we all know that, hey, this is a time that we need to be courageous. We don't need to shrink back in fear. We need to be courageous. But with the landscape that we're in, sometimes being courageous is hard to see. Like, what does that look like, you know? I know for me, there's this somewhat of an impulse to say, man, our country is such in a mess that I almost want to turn and say, I'm going to focus on my business. I'm going to focus on my family. I'm going to change the people immediately around me. But if we all just kind of keep putting our heads down and doing our thing, we could look up and see the disintegration of culture. Because I think this event, it means a lot to me. Charlie was a Christian. Um, he had many similar values. I have some things I disagree with him for sure on too. But overall, I'm thankful for his connection to the gospel and him. Man, like no one could say he wasn't bold about that aspect of his life. He was doing this type of campus ministry, I think, for about 12 years. You know, but but what does it look like to be a courageous person? And I think, in a way, in a lot of people that we're mentoring, talking to, is from a Christian perspective. What does it look like to be Christ-like and be courageous? Because sometimes I think, man, we get angry at something like this, and rightly so. But then we allow the rage to take us in a direction that has a righteous veneer to it, but actually lacks like true, if you want to say true righteousness or true conviction, the way it should be. And so I want to kind of dive into that. So, from your perspective, what do you think courage looks like? Like step one.
I think courage, number one, is to say something when you're afraid. We're going to have people that disagree with us, especially in light of that. John, you said, hey, there's a lot of things about Charlie Kirk and what he believes that I agree with. I think there's a connection to us in our belief systems where we feel like, wait, Charlie Kirk is similar to me. So is there a target on me too,
Mm,
as well?
mm.
There's a fear there. And you could just go on social media and see many guys feeling the same way as well, just
Yes.
because of their beliefs. So I think true courage, defined, is not having no fear. It's taking action and doing something
Yes.
when you're afraid. That's true courage.
Yeah. No,
So
I think that's right. Yep. And courage, not
I
the
think
absence of fear. You know,
that's
for
right.
sure. It's pressing, really pressing on despite that fear. One thing
Mm.
I'd like to kind of bring up that I think might be helpful, kind of a thought experiment that might help. Let's flip this around. Here is somebody, because I know transgenderism has been in this conversation, like with, is this motivated by this? And I'm not going to go into motive too much because I'm sure there's more evidence that's going to be coming out. But I just want to use this as a hypothetical. Let's say that somebody went to college campuses who was a transgender advocate, and he was preaching the good news from his mindset of freedom in transgenderism and how we should embrace it and stuff. Now, I am against transgender ideology. I think it's harmful. I do. Um, but if I heard on the news that a somebody from the right, politically, that felt like, I think this person is spreading hate. I don't think they should be welcomed onto college campuses. And he ended up saying, you know what? There's some hate that you just can't reason with. And by the way, Tyler said something like that in a text. I don't know if you saw his text
Mm.
messages come out. Uh, and he shot that person in the neck and he died. I think as Christian people, we should be just as much irate. I don't know if I should say just as much. Obviously, there's some deeper elements to, like, oh, hey, this guy was attacked. Was he attacked for his faith? Was that embedded in that? But what I mean is that we should, as Christian people, fight for the freedom of people expressing ideas, and that it should not be handled in physical violence. Like, we'd be like, this is uncalled for. This is outrageous. If you flipped it around, the Christian response would be like, I think it's fine to express your thoughts. It's fine to fight for this not being allowed on college campuses. It's fine um, to be passionate about saying, I want to try to eradicate any type of indoctrination when it comes to transgenderism. I think we have the freedom to pursue that, but to take matters into our own hands and to take someone's life is wrong. It's evil. It's not the way forward. I say that for a thought experiment because what we're talking about here, like just full stop, the death of this man was evil. Just full stop. And
Mhm.
for somebody to say, well, convictionally, I think he was spreading bad ideas, so someone needs to do it. People need to see that that is just categorically evil. And if we all embrace that mentality, then we're going to go around killing people that we disagree with. It doesn't promote a free country. It doesn't promote something that's healthy, a true pluralistic society that says, "Hey, we don't we don't all agree, but we will respect each other." You know? And honestly, I think a that comes from a Christian perspective, you know? This is what love requires of us. You don't have to believe what I believe, but I am going to show you the love of God, you know? All human beings were created in the image of God. All life should be respected. Not all opinions should be respected, but all life should be respected. And when those opinions differ, that's where the public space of debate, discourse, like, is important. So what I would suggest in courage is that we don't allow people to intimidate us away from saying, "This is categorically evil." And for those who would say, "Oh my goodness, but do you know some of the things that Kirk said was racist, and some of the stuff he said was hateful." Which which by the
Mhm.
way, like, I was thinking about this. Kirk is 31 years old, and for what he's done in his life, it's incredible. He's done a lot, you know? His ability to speak, he's a really quick-witted guy, be able to speak on his feet. Um, some of his debates I left, I was like, "Wow," like, he did that well. Occasionally, I, um, I felt like, "Oh, you know what? I probably wouldn't have said that." There was one guy that got really frustrated with him, and he walked away, and, he said, "Bob Ross, come back," because the guy had, like, a fro
Hmm.
type of thing. He's like, "Hey, Bob Ross, where are you going?" And anybody that was kind of for, uh, Charlie Kirk would probably laugh like, "Oh, that was a good one." But I kinda think, "Man, if you do that year after year, that's probably not a good thing to kind of insult the people that you're talking with." He didn't do that all the time. A lot of times he was great. There was times where I was seeing him show great respect for people. I think there were some times where I'm like, "Ooh, I wouldn't say that," or I even might have, like, disagreed with some of his points. But at the end of the day, it's like, he pushed the freedom of discourse, and he wanted to have conversation, and that's something that we need to fight for, regardless of whether or not you agreed with them entirely or not. We need to fight for that freedom of discourse. So courage looks like, I think, being tenacious over that. It's like we can get caught up in the weeds of like, did he make a racial statement or not? It's like, maybe I saw some of the statements that I thought he could have showed more care on. Probably context would bear out. Like I think I saw other things where he didn't really seem to be racist. There were some statements he made that seemed like, oh, that probably wasn't the best. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, he's not a perfect guy. I don't know, Keith, if you've spoken a lot publicly, but I look back on speeches and I'm like, "Did I really say that?" Or, "I can't believe I said that." It's like and here's another thing that I don't like in culture, and sorry if I'm digressing too much here, but, like, I don't like in culture where somebody said something 10 years ago, and then it's, like, brought back up, like, "Oh, they said this 10 years ago." It's like, well, maybe they did, but, like, a lot can happen in 10 years. People change their thoughts and
Oh, yeah.
opinions. So ask them about it, ask them if they still hold that view, ask them what they meant by it, and instead of just kind of going on a smear campaign. And that's what I think happens in, for instance, like this. We just wanna we have we're emotional creatures, and so we have this emotional impulse, and we wanna support that emotional impulse with the news that fits that impulse, you know? And I think as just being people that are gonna be courageous, we need to know what is true. We need to admit where people are wrong. We don't need to, like, kinda posture someone up as the savior who's come in, Charlie Kirk great man, loved his family, had great values, but he's not perfect and he's not the savior. And we don't need to posture him up that way. But we do need to carry the torch of fighting for this was wrong. We need to seek justice, which I think that's happening. But then moving towards doing our part in society to make sure that religious freedom in speech continues. I think
Agreed.
that's at the very hub of what we want to see accomplished.
John,
What you're
you're 40 now, right?
40. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, what were you like when you were 30? Are you different now?
Oh my goodness. Dude. Yeah.
Do you
Very,
have more
very
compassion
different.
for people, maybe? Have you matured a little bit?
I hope so, man. I hope so. No, yeah. No, that's exactly what I'm getting at. It's like,
Maybe some of those sermons you preached when you were 30, you look back and those are the ones you think, "Did I say that?"
yeah, I like, and sometimes you're just like, you're trying to figure out who you are as a person. And so
Mm,
you're kind of putting on these different personalities. Like you saw the strong preacher, right? And you're like, I'm going to emulate that a little bit. And,
mhm,
or you get praise for like, wow, he says it as it is, man. He's just really
mhm,
bold. And before you know it, you're kind of bulldozing people because you're trying to take on this identity and you've kind of lost um, what it looks like to love people. But sometimes really loving people does mean saying the hard thing, you know? Um, so I think this is why it's good to develop people that speak into your life. You develop good self awareness, but people speaking into your life. Um, but but I don't, for anybody listening in, I'm not trying to be overly critical of Charlie Kirk. Hopefully, what you hear is like, dude, when I was 31, I probably said a lot of dumb things. And he's one of those guys at 18 years of age, with just doing some research, he was already raising money, getting out there, speaking on campuses. He forewent going to college himself and just had a vision, started this business slash ministry Turning Point America or America Turning
Turning
Point?
Point USA, TP
USA,
USA.
that's it, okay.
Yeah.
I should have written that down, anyways. But yeah, I think there's some good things there. I think, some of the reasons why Christians have had a hard time some Christians have had a hard time rallying here too, is that they've heard things that he had said, or maybe some of the snarky responses. There's lots of clips going around right now. And the only thing I would say is he probably did say some things that were wrong. He probably came across snarky or was snarky sometimes. Have you ever been in a debate? Have you ever been in a place where it got hot? It's easy to throw sarcasm and snark, and it just happens.
Mm,
Like,
yeah.
it's very difficult to just kind of keep your cool, to keep your composure. If you're doing this all the time, you're probably going to have bad days. I mean, we do this in life where, um, do you ever have days you're not even in the hot seat, but you've just been short with people, you know? Well, I no doubt, I'm sure he had moments like that. So we don't need to be like, oh man, let's try to protect. Let's admit where he was wrong. I think he made a statement about like, if I see a black guy um, piling a plane, I'm gonna ask like, is he real? Can he really do this? Is he able to do it? And I think he was kind of addressing where a lot of places were moving towards like hiring people just so they have a diversity of race. And he was like,
Mm,
we need to hire people based on their qualifications, whether they're white or black or what. We need to be, he would use the term colorblind. And I think what he was trying to get at, some of it was good, but his rhetoric definitely sounded horrible. Like I was cringing. It
mhm.
was cringeworthy. It's like, oh, yeah, dude, that's not helpful. Doesn't help the conversation. I don't know if he went back and listened to it because I do this. I'll go back and listen to speeches and things I get. I'm like, oh man, that's what I said, but that's not really what I meant. I don't know. We can't really ask him those type of things. But I think though you don't what the reason why I brought this up is to say you don't need to have clarity on Charlie Kirk being perfect in order to say this was categorically wrong to kill a man. Also, if here's a man who says, I'm not going to cause any physical harm, I'm just going to speak truth. And you think of a lot of things that we would say, similar things like, what does it mean to be a man or a woman? Or, you know, what about the rights of the unborn? Um, what is it like? What is the purpose of life? And if we bring in the gospel, there's a lot of similar themes. And we're like, man, if I bring up these things, is somebody going to call that hate and shoot me too? You know,
Mm,
we should be concerned about that, and we should speak out. And we shouldn't bury our heads. Um, at the same time, I think this does inform us. And I know some people are going to think this is not done in good taste, but I also think we should say, hey, when we're saying these things, we need to make sure that we maintain a lot of grace and a lot of kindness and a lot of
yeah.
being understanding. Um, because when somebody speaks on your behalf and they do it in a really bold and maybe almost angrily way, you like it because they're doing it for you. But if you're on the other end of that, it's really hard to take. And we need to try to create a scenario where we don't water down what we believe and what we say, but we also make sure that we're very careful on how that's delivered. Now, here's the truth. There are going to be people that take whatever you say, no matter how you say it, and they're going to say hate speech. It's just like people that like they never confront themselves. They always say the problem's outside of me, never in me. If you make them mad, they're going to find something you did wrong. You know, you can't change that. But I don't think that that should make us cynical and like, oh, well, you know, either take it or leave it. You can be a fool. It's like, okay, probably that kind of language is not going to be helpful. This is one thing I've learned about debate, and I'm not a professional debater at all. But one thing I've learned about debate is one way that you win is not just what you say, but how you say it. And if you can remain calm and confident, actually goes much further than throwing insults and ad hominems and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, I'm going to remain confident. I'm going to ask questions. And I think from a Christian perspective, we realize that somebody that's far, far too, if you want to say to the left, somebody with crazy, maybe what we would consider crazy ideologies, those are people made in the image of God for whom Christ died for. And they're ultimately not the enemy. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, Ephesians 6. So our goal is for Christ's love to win in them, for them to be, we want them to be saved. We want them to know Christ. It's so easy, though, for us to start to view them as like the ultimate enemy. Now, I understand in the New Testament, sometimes Paul would call somebody the enemy of the cross. And I don't think it's wrong to necessarily say they are diametrically opposed to truth. They're diametrically opposed to the way things are and calling that out. But I do think that we should, as long as they're breathing, we should be praying and hoping that they would experience life, you
Yeah.
know, in Christ. So there's a couple of thoughts. So to kind of
Yeah.
to summarize, if somebody was just like, "Why would you stand up for a man like this?" I would say, I would stand up for any person that suffered this kind of injustice. However, but I also think to say, I do think that there is a force in our country there's this heating up of hating anything that is, um, you want to say biblical or traditional values,
Hmm.
and people saying that's toxic or evil. And so what they're doing is they're forcing us to say, "Hey, what you're doing is good." And they're trying to force us to say, "Yeah, what we're doing is toxic." And we're not doing that. We're pushing back and saying, actually, it's the opposite. And they're saying it's hate. And I think that's where we have to be bold and we have to call them on that and be patient. This is my opinion. I think most of Americans would probably be center left and center right. I don't think most Americans are on the extremes. I don't.
Yeah.
I think there are reasonable people on that are kind of more in that center space that actually can have intelligent conversations about these things. But because the minorities, the left and right, are so loud, we just feel like, man, we just live in a crazy polarized society. Those are the ones doing the most talking. Most of Americans, I feel like, are in that, whether center right, center left space. What's your thoughts there?
Well, it would be the classic bell curve, right? So you could look at the visual of a bell curve, and that probably is pretty close to where those extremes are. Like super far left, super far right's probably closer to, I mean, like just crazy, closer to 2%. So 1% of our population is psychopathic. So if you're in a church with 100 people, you got one psychopath in the church.
Yes.
And that doesn't even account for antisocial behavior people. That's like 6%. So you're going to have extremes just because of that. People have needs there and they need help. And they have a really tough time dealing with these types of difficult conflicts. But man, John, you got a lot to unpack there. I want to go all the way back to the illustration, the opposite of if it was not Charlie Kirk, but somebody who believed opposite. I think you said a transgender advocate, right? Actually, the answer for this was given to us 2,000 years ago by Christ. There was a lawyer who walked up to Jesus Christ and said, "What's the most important commandment?" And Jesus said that you should love God and that you should love your neighbor as yourself. This is the pivotal crux of how we're supposed to treat one another. This whole passage, you can find it over in Luke 6:27 to 36. But this lawyer says, well, who's my neighbor? How do we define who the neighbor is? And then he goes into the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan, you have to understand the historical significance of that Samaritan and Jews. And it helps you understand the story. Basically, the story is there's a Jewish man. He's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho when he's attacked by robbers. He's beaten and he's left for half dead. Well, one of the spiritual leaders walks by. Actually, two of them. A priest walks by and a Levite, two religious people. They should be the ones who are helping this guy, this Jew, but they don't. They pass by the injured man. In fact, if you think a little deeper on it, maybe they thought he was dead, and in their religion, they're not supposed to touch dead bodies. So maybe that was part of the reason. I don't know. Passage doesn't really say. But we know that in the story, in this parable that Jesus is saying, the ones who should have helped did not help. The ones who were supposed to love did not help because they were more concerned about what they felt was law instead of love. And there was, because of that, an imbalance of justice. Justice is love. It's a proper action, the proper place, and the proper time. It's true wisdom. Well, then comes along this guy, a Samaritan. The Samaritan is despised by the Jews. And let me tell you why, because this is going to help. The Samaritans had actively participated in the defilement of the land from the Jews' perspective. They'd polluted their bloodline. They were guilty of idolatry, which basically means they were worshiping other gods other than the one true God. As far as the Jews were concerned, their very existence was evil. And this is the hero in the story, in the parable of the Good Samaritan. So this Samaritan comes by, he feels compassion, he puts bandages on the man's wounds, pours oil and wine and puts him on his very own donkey and then takes him to this inn. And then the Samaritan cares for the man at the inn. He actually gives the innkeeper money and promises to pay the innkeeper anything he needs as far as additional expenses to take care of this guy. This is his enemy. This Jew wants to kill the Samaritan. Like that, the Jewish people want to kill the Samaritan. He's the one who takes care of this Jew on the road. Well, after the parable's done, he turns to the lawyer and says, "Who was the neighbor?" And the lawyer can't even say the guy's name. He's like, the man who helped the Jew, right?
Mm-hmm.
He can't even say, he despises the name so much. It took me years to unlock the truth of that story. I've heard that my entire life, that parable. But it wasn't until I was probably 37, to your point of like maturing and aging and the brain developing, that I started to actually, I grasped the truth of that. And to your story, that was one of the things that I had a question in my mind after Charlie Kirk happened. I had the exact same question in my mind. Have I felt a lack of empathy and love towards somebody else who has different beliefs than me? And I think that's one of the good things that comes out of that we should be thinking like that. In fact, that's what Christ says. He says, hey, this is what it means to love your neighbor. I'm going to use somebody who you think is evil as the example of what it means to
Yeah.
truly show love. And it's profound. Let me give you one other thing that Christ says on the Sermon on the Mount. One of the most pivotal passages about that you can read about Christ. And one of the things that he says is that we should love our enemies, that we should do good to those who hate us and even spitefully use us. Try to unpack that. And I think we could all probably say, yeah, there's been some failure. There's been some failure, no matter which side you're on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
so good.
that
Yeah.
that I think is the lesson for us that's timeless. It's been around for a long time, but we constantly forget it. And whether it was Charlie Kirk or a transgender activist who had 2 kids, who, so on and so forth, then that whole similar story, our hearts should care, like be the Samaritan towards that person and their family, and say to the innkeeper, here, whatever money it takes, take care of this person. That's what our
Yes.
hearts should be. So it is so confusing when I see Christians showing the exact opposite mentality towards both sides, towards Charlie Kirk, or if it was a transgender activist instead. I think what's happened is we are worshiping, and I've been researching this a little bit, pietism, not God. We're worshiping pietism. It's worshiping religion instead of Jesus Christ and true doctrine and true love. And as we know, um, love, justice, true love, those two things, law and love, God can only embody that perfectly. And we try to do that towards others. But often what we see is from the contents of our heart, something that's different, but we think we're doing the right thing, but it's actually not if we put that up to the mirror of Scripture. So
Yes.
it's imperative that we look at this situation from not just our viewpoint, and we're sad, we're just wondering, how can this happen? But also, as you were mentioning, we need to look at it from the opposite perspective. What if the opposite had happened? How would our response be? How can we have more empathy and embody the truth of what Jesus Christ has called us to in that?
Yes. Yes. So this that was so good. I loved how you unpack that. Such a good story, and the fact that um, the story hits more deeply than you would suspect, especially since they're the um, like a Samaritan, for instance, would be somebody that would not be a good person, but does the noble thing. It's just like
Yeah.
there's more to the story than you might initially even realize when you start reading it, which Jesus did over and over and over again. I saw this post that might highlight some of what we're seeing in our country is that there's a almost the person called it a Democrat version of Jesus and a Republican. I don't know if I would use those labels,
Yeah.
but I just using it for illustration where they say the Republican form of Jesus is he's the king, he's conquering, he's bringing his kingdom, and we should be a part of bringing that, even into every subset of culture and all this kind of stuff. It can kind of tie into what's called Christian nationalism, which I think the overarching courage of it can be a good thing. I also think it can distort the gospel, um, the Christian nationalism, particularly. And I think it is reversing some things that they tried to undo in something like the Protestant Reformation. I'll explain that, what I mean by that in a moment. But the but that's the Jesus of the Republicans is just like this conqueror, and we need to conquer too kind of feel. We need to take back. We need to take back culture. The other side, the Democrat version of Jesus, like that's not Jesus at all. Jesus was not trying to overthrow the Roman Empire. Jesus was trying to bring a different kind of kingdom that served the marginalized, that cared about the poor, and that cared about you know, um, the immigrant. Okay, so you see where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
And so what Jesus looked like to them, they'll focus on these qualities. And Jesus over here, different qualities are being projected. And the truth is we probably could see truths of actually Jesus showing some of both of these to some level. But if you truly want like a biblical Jesus, it's probably going to press into both of these categories a little bit. It's going to press
Mm.
into these party lines to where we're like, oh, you know what? There's some good Christian values that are being communicated over here, but they're missing these. And there's some good Christian values being communicated over here, but they're missing this. And we feel like an orphan when it comes to politics a little bit. It's like, oh man, I'm not even sure where exactly I land on all this because it can be quite confusing. And I think I just want to say it, and I don't really mind if somebody gets upset at this point, but it's just like it is okay to say, I don't really agree with any of these altogether. I want to be a faithful Christian. And I'm not going to always get it right, but I'm going to try to, as best I can, to line up with what is true and what is going to represent Christ truly and his kingdom. Now, if you go back, um, have you ever looked into the study of secularism, the word secular? It
Of a little.
actually if you look at it, it was an idea that probably came out of the Protestant Reformation. And it was a desire to stop. So everything was pretty much controlled. The state and the church were so married together. Now, I'm not a historian. So anybody listening in, I would definitely check all these facts. What I'm about to say, you can probably fine tune it a little bit. But one of the things that the Protestant Reformation highlighted was like, oh, hey, there is some abuse that is occurring where people are kind of forced into a kind of religiosity. And with a full understanding of grace and the gospel and actually true Catholicity, if you go back to really early church, they realized, like, hey, we need to recover um, some of the nature of the early church, and it wasn't wrapped up in the state, and it wasn't wrapped up in a pursuit of power, and it wasn't wrapped up in control. That wasn't the way the kingdom of Christ advanced. And so one of the basis of like American culture at its beginnings, its origin was to say, hey, we want to fight for a separation of church and state. We're pushing for a secular culture. But I don't know if I've read the book. It's by Michael Bird. It's called Religious Freedom in a Secular Age. It's a really
Mm.
interesting book. I'd actually recommend you read it sometime if you haven't. Um, Bird is really thoughtful. I just nuance. I don't agree with everything that he says. I mean, I don't think I agree with anybody on everything they say, even myself. But I'll digress.
Yeah.
He said he said that there is a distinction between benign secularism and militant secularism. And this is how he defined it. Benign secularism was, um, let me make sure I have it right here. It was basically just a healthy separation from church and state to allow religion to flourish. So it didn't push religion on people. It allowed freedom of conscience. You know, I mean, we're not going to force this on you. Which in the past there were the religious and state connections that did force a kind of religiosity on people. It's like, that's not true religion. That's not the gospel. That's not what we want. So we want a secular society where there is freedom. But what began to take place is people began to apply that secularism to say, we're anti-religious. We want to move all marks of faith, all marks of religiosity out of culture where there's no space for God. That's the militant secularism. So we as Christians would say, no, 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 no. We're not talking about taking God and Christian values like away from culture. You know, we're talking about there being a freedom of conscience, a freedom of speech, a freedom to express. Yet we're not trying to move away from good fundamentals of what it looks like to be free. If you know what I mean. And I think that's really helpful. So like when we're going to fight for the path forward to be courageous, there is this movement in culture right now that kind of has the feeling of Christian nationalism that says we want to take it back. We so for instance, let's say a person who's a transgender says, I want to start a cake shop in this town. And he goes to do it. He's not trying to push his transgenderism. It's just who he is. But he just starts a cake shop and somebody finds out he's transgender. We should try to do everything we can to shut down this cake shop. It's our Christian responsibility to shut down this cake shop and get this person out of town. I don't think that's a Christian response. I don't think that that's the right way to go. I actually think that people saying, hey, this person's in our town, let's build a relationship with them. Let's love them. They are a person that God created, made in the image of God. It's a person for whom Christ died. How can we befriend them and share with them the gospel? It might actually look like buying some cakes from them, But this is the razor sharp edge. It's hard to determine what's always the right way. But it's like, I want to tell the person the truth about something. I want to help them. I want to help them thrive. There's plenty of scientific studies so far, studies that showed that when you indoctrinate children on transgender ideology, that it's actually pretty harmful. They're already trying to figure out their identity. Like, okay, I'm a girl. What does it look like to be a girl? But if you're like, well, you may not be a girl. You might be a boy trapped in a girl's body. Okay, now you've introduced this layer that is really unnecessary for someone at that age.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting I'm an expert on the best language for parsing that out, but I
My
will
daughter
say,
says sometimes she's a dinosaur. I have a funny, cute video on Facebook
I
about
love
that.
that so much.
She
I
has
think
a
I remember that.
tutu on and a Darth Vader mask, and she walked up to me and said, "I'm a dinosaur."
Yes.
Kids are so
That is
funny.
so funny. I remember I saw that video. She's so adorable. So anyways, without kind of muddying the water too much, my thought process, there has to be a way forward where we say we love all people regardless of who they are. We're not just trying to create a Christian town. We're trying to realize until Christ comes back, there's going to be a mixture of those who are religious and non-religious. We want to build a society that is accommodating to the freedom of conscience. We want that. That actually started with Christians. That's a Christian idea in response to religion and the state binding people's conscience to actually affirm something they didn't actually truly believe. So it's a move of clarity. It's a move of integrity. It's a good move. Meanwhile, as Christians, we believe that people are converted through hearing the gospel and the Spirit of God moving upon them. They're born again. And it's not a coercing, it's an invitation. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, I'll give you rest." He didn't come and, at least at this point, he didn't come and force his kingdom upon people. He came and he allowed people to either receive or reject, you know? And yet, even one of his disciples who he knew would betray him, he showed him love, gave him space, gave him opportunity, if you were, you know? And I just think that the courage is being able to stand up for what we believe in, while at the same time, a Christ-like courage is saying, how do we show love to our enemies? That invites them to the table so that we not only just kind of put up with each other, but we actually see people come to faith in Christ. We see them experience the kingdom that is to come. I think of the verse that Paul said in Corinthians. He talks about those who would not inherit the kingdom. And he gives this litany of drunkards, extortioners, blah, 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 blah. But he said this is so beautiful, man. So beautiful. He says, but such were some of you. And I'm thinking like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. Wouldn't that be beautiful to hear? Here are these people, like whether it's transgenderism, LGBTQ. And by the way, straight people need salvation just as much. This is not about sexual orientation really at all. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. There's nobody that's actually like, oh, straight people, they're a little bit more righteous than the non-straight people. It's like, nope. We're all fallen short of the glory of God. There's nothing that do with righteous. We need Christ, you know? And see, I think if we can allow the gospel to impact us deeply, it will inform the kind of courage that will be productive for the kingdom. If we don't, we can fall into a kind of courage that has a Jesus label that's actually disrupting a kind of society that we ultimately want to build. And we're just feeding into the rage. We're more polarizing than we were before, but we pat ourselves on the back because we did it in the name of Jesus. And it's like, that's not the way forward. It's not the way forward.
The guy who was talking to Charlie, Hunter Kodak, I believe is his name, when Charlie was shot, he was interviewed by a YouTube channel called Channel 5, and I got to watch that. Now, Hunter Kodak don't necessarily agree with the guy on everything by any means, but he came from a really interesting perspective, and he probably would have been a conversation that was challenging Charlie, that I probably would have been like, man, he's got a good point. And Charlie doesn't really have a good point, actually. But they weren't able to finish the conversation. He's a mathematician, and he was talking about stats on shootings. And it was very interesting. And he went a little bit more into detail on this Channel 5 interview that he was doing. But one of the things that I was really interested to dive in a little bit more after hearing him say this was he's really concerned about the sin of certainty in our world. And actually, he was quite humble when he was talking. He had some mathematics that he wanted to, stuff that he had put together. I don't even understand, but just some stats he had put together and such within some Google Sheets, and he wanted to show that. But he wasn't coming at it from a prideful viewpoint. He was just saying, hey, look, we can't make these generalizations when the data doesn't really say that. So let's talk about the data. And he's definitely left-leaning for sure. He came from a conservative background and then over time became more left-leaning. Definitely left. And that phrase he said, the struggle of our world with the sin of certainty, it made me, it was definitely a bridge for me. I was like, yeah, I'd agree on that. Look, and then just looking it up a little bit, Peter Enns in the book, The Sin of Certainty, he wrote this in 2016. It's not a biblical phrase by any means, but it's a critique of a certain mindset within Christianity. So it's the idea of placing your ultimate trust in having the right answers about God, the Bible, and theology rather than God himself. It treats intellectual correctness as the foundation of salvation. I've heard this said by Christians as good doctrine. Good doctrine. As long as we have good doctrine, I know doctrine. Doctrine's the most important thing. I think that's been muddied with this idea of as long as I know good doctrine, I'll be doing great. But I've seen guys who know really good doctrine who are very unloving towards other people. And if you know
Mhm.
doctrine, you know knowledge, that should result in understanding proper justice, which is proper love. That's the result. That's the whole point that Jesus makes in the parable. If you've got the love God with all your heart, mind, and soul right, it should result in this. It can lead to arrogance, judgmentalism, and fear of doubt. The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Jeremiah, right? Faith becomes about defending propositions instead of living a relationship with Christ. And what it critiques overconfidence in doctrinal systems, fear of doubt. That's another interesting thing. I've seen many who had such a strong stance in doctrine. And then a few years later, they're like, yeah, I'm an atheist. Like, wait, what? how did how did that happen? And it's interesting. I've even seen, and I'm not trying to knock atheists. This could be like many different belief systems. So just it could be Buddhism to atheists. It could be whatever belief system. But I've seen those people go back and forth on these belief systems, and they're trying to find the one that helps them rid fear and doubt in their life. And they just can't find it. So they go all over the place. So they're looking to have self-control over allowing God to have control in their life. I see that in these thoughts. So I would agree with Hunter that there's a sin of certainty on both sides. So that's from a religious perspective. Let's just take the word secularism for a second. There's this idea in when we had, oh, you just mentioned it. It was the Age of Enlightenment, right? That was a result of people wanting to get away from this idea of sin of certainty in religion. People saying, I have the answer, you need to do this, so on and so forth. They said, well, this isn't resulting, something's off here. So what about reason? How, let's look at that. So they started doing that, blowing up all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, you can be a person who has the sin of certainty. And Hunter was trying to reference this, not just on the religious side, but also on that secular side, feeling like you have all the answers and have the exact same mentality. That's kind of the Christian who had all the answers, who then became an atheist, who now has all the answers, and now he's berating Christians for for their so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I've seen that on both sides, and I thought that was quite astute of Hunter to say in that moment when I was listening to him on that podcast, and I highly recommend it too. It was really good.
Share that with me. I'd love to hear that. I've been thinking about that topic for a long time, and even in my studies of, like, Christian theology and apologetics, I begin to say, like, sometimes the way we try to communicate things, in churches, we overstate things to create certainty in people, and we're like, "Oh, no, it would be a shame if they had a level of doubt or struggle," and it's like, no. A matter of fact, like, Tim Keller, who I think passed away last year, year before, man,
Yeah,
time flies. He
I
said
know.
something that was so, he actually addressed this idea of certainty. He said, "You can get really smart people," and this is a little off topic, but I think it's worth chasing, but, like, it is talking about, like, the smart Christian philosophers and theologians, and it's not like they're dumb. Yeah, I can name people that are really super smart, brilliant, have high IQ, EQ, whatever, and, um and they would give reasons for God, the existence of God, and maybe even reasons for, more specifically, that Christianity is true. Um, and then you have really smart people on the other end who would say, "I don't think these arguments work. I don't feel like, I think they fall short." And it's not like they're doing it all and like, "Oh, I wanna cover sin. I just wanna sin. That's why I'm doing this." Like they're just looking at this and they come to like an actual different conclusion. and he basically said that at the end of the day, if you take all of the arguments for God, it's not definitive proof. Like you couldn't prove it in a science experiment. You know, it's basically evidence that stacks up. It's a cumulative case argument that says, hey, based on this, the best inference is that, hey, belief in God is rational. And from his perspective, he's saying, hey, it's most likely that God does exist and that Christianity is true. And he says the evidence is, and he used the word, he said, it's persuasive to me. This reminds me of Pauline language. I know whom I
Mm.
believed and am persuaded. So there, nothing wrong with saying I'm convinced, I'm persuaded, but at the same time, it's realizing like, hey, there is a level of I haven't seen this by sight yet. If there's faith, it has to coexist with some level of uncertainty. There has to be uncertainty embedded in faith. If there's no uncertainty, then you're in sight at that point. Um, and so he just said there's no one grand slam argument for the existence of God, not just one slam dunk argument. You build a case, and the evidence tends to push more towards this. But he said something that was interesting. He says, but after you stack all those evidence, there is kind of a leap of
Mm.
faith. It's
Yeah.
not based, it's not groundless. You do have evidence, but there is a point where you're like, I don't know everything there is to know about this earth, but this makes the most sense. It tracks the most with reality. I'm choosing to believe it based on faith. There is a faith element to it. But he said, it's not like, and this is where Charles Taylor in his book, The Secular Age, it's a huge book, dude. It's like massive. Um, Christian philosopher. But he says the idea today is that Christians hold to faith, atheists or agnostic hold to reason and facts. And he
Hmm.
says this is a
Yeah.
completely wrong paradigm. He says that when you go from like religious faith to atheism, you're adopting a new set of beliefs that are just as much unprovable as what you would esteem the faith conviction to be. So in other words, he's saying when you say, "Hey, I don't believe in God," it's not that you could prove that God doesn't exist. You can't do that. You're basically stacking up the evidence. You're still taking a leap of faith. I don't know if I'm explaining this the best way. Sorry if it's taking me a long time to get to the explanation. But what I love about what Keller does in this illustration is he levels the playing field and says, "Hey, we're all living by faith. We're all looking at the evidence and coming to a conclusion, but there's still a mystery that we all have too. We don't all have, none of us have like 100% definitive proof. And what Keller's saying is none of us have absolute certainty, but it is so attractive to, to almost kind of pretend that you have the certainty, and that attracts because where there is certainty, it gives you the illusion that, hey, I can squash out my fear. I can squash out my anxiety. I'm certain. But what I love about the Christian faith is we can say, you know what? There's a lot that's uncertain, but I can trust in God, and this is an anchor. And I've seen it proven over, not only like factually, but experientially. I've seen this over and over and over again. But it's not a pursuit of certainty. It's a pursuit of greater knowledge. And that's exactly what Paul says, that I may know him, the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable into his death. It's that pursuit, like we talked about before, that participatory knowing.
Yeah.
I want to know this by experience. And so, anyways, what you said really resonated with me. I do think this, in a strictly religious context, certainty can be a problem on both ends, and it can become really idolatry, the pursuit
It
of
can. Yeah.
absolute certainty. And I think it actually strengthens our argument, I think, with non-believing Christians. It's like, hey, could you prove the existence of God? No, I can't. But man, there is a ton of crazy evidence. Do you want to see it?
Yeah.
Do you
Yep.
see how that's different? To me, it's like, oh my goodness, it's an invitation. And I could just
Mm.
say, "Hey, look at this. What do you think? Okay, I see what you're saying, but I don't know if it's convincing to me. Oh, how about this? And how about this? Have you ever looked at the nature of the scriptures, and then also like the story of the resurrection. I mean, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, what explains all this craziness in the first century? You know,
Mm.
like I just think that this all of this accumulates to something that I think could be very persuasive. But if we pretend to be certain about everything, and we can prove, and the reason why you're rejecting is just because you hate God, and that's why you're rejecting. It's like, um, that's probably not going to be very effective in gospel witness. You're not going to make friends and influence people
Yeah.
that way. I'm just that's it.
No.
What's that
You
book?
know,
How to Make Friends Influence People.
yeah,
Go
how to
ahead.
win friends and influence people. Peter, yeah. I One of the other things that you talked about was this idea, you were referencing it, but I think we need to discuss too. It's the words that we use, and I want to talk a little bit about another guy who's passed away, R.C. Sproul. Good old R.C. Sproul. He
RC.
popularized a term called cage stage Calvinist. He said Michael Horton was the guy who coined the term. But ever since I heard cage stage Calvinist, I've been thinking about that, not just in relation to Calvinism. Basically, it was a humorous, self-depreciating term to used within Reformed and Calvinistic circles to describe a new convert who had just come to Calvinism, who's ready to be overzealous, argumentative, and has this huge passion for having all the right answers and is ready to just argue everybody on it, right? Well, I thought that was funny. I'd never heard of that term before when I first heard it. But I started thinking about this idea of, okay, and basically what R.C. Sproul would say is it'd be better for them to be put into a cage and mature a little bit, and then they could be let out when they matured. That was kind of the idea of cage stage. So I've been thinking about that, though, in relation to more broad beliefs that we all have, that we all change into. You
Mm,
could go from not just cage stage Calvinism, which is a subset of Christianity, is a subset belief. There's many. But you could go from that to agnostic. You could go to atheism. You could go to some other belief system. I think the term we've used today is modern day wokeism. That's another one. And talking about the sin of certainty is trying to avoid the unknown, the fear and anxiety of the unknown. And what I've seen is there's similarities between people. We're all just humans. We're all just people. There's similarities when when a person goes from one belief system to another. It's almost like they go into this cage stage where they're like, I have all the right answers. Let me just tell you all the right answers and why you're so wrong. And I think what's happened is, uh, first, you if somebody's talking to you like when they're in cage stage, and you don't agree with them, it's almost like they believe you're evil. Something like you're even going to hell. You don't believe like me, you're going to hell. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And you could see that though in almost any change in any belief system. There's almost this mentality in cage stage where they're like, oh yeah, you're going to hell, you're whatever, or that evil, you could say unloving mentality, really, which Christ was saying, no, that's not what your belief system should. A good right justice results in love, and then the story of the Good Samaritan, right? So I've seen wokeism, I've seen any type of belief system, I've seen this, and now let's talk about terminology. There is an evil in this world called racism. When I was in high school, I joined arms with my high school buddies on what was evil about the term racism. And we knew who the enemy was. And this is a conversation I was having with actually one of my atheist employees the other day. I was just talking about the difficulty here. She was talking about the term Nazi. She said, I have real Nazis here in Spain. They put swastikas up, and it's a real problem actually in the area. Well, there's a real problem today in wokeism where a family member or a neighbor is called racist because of their skin color. Now, back when I was in high school, that was racism. You don't define anybody by their skin color. That's racism. But now it's become popular again to say you're racist. And now the term racism, it's like, okay, is that evil? Because I'm pretty sure, I mean, that's my brother, that's my dad. I'm pretty sure they're a good person. That's my neighbor. I'm pretty sure they're a good person. I think they're a good leader. They're adding value to our lives, and they're definitely not evil. But I'm putting this evil term on them, and I've actually thought maybe racism is a new term by wokeism to define what we've as Christians call sin. Like, there's the more I've read it about it and such. Like, yeah, okay, I can agree. Like, we're all sinful people, but it's a term that has been hijacked, and now it's used to define what is evil, but it's actually not what, like, okay, were we fighting today? We don't know. And Nazi is another one. Fascism is another one. We're throwing these terms out there, and you could define terms on either side. It's happening on either side. But it's so important that we're careful with the words that we're using. And I think that often those terms can come really from a cage stage sort of belief system where you're not empathetic towards, you're not understanding the other, you're not seeking to be their loving neighbor. It, if we think about that parable. So that's also been a real big concern in my mind from this Charlie Kirk thing. And I think everybody's thought about that as well. Not just
I think it's
what's
where
said
you
about Charlie, but also what we've on the I would say on the more right side, what's been said about even liberals, and even in conversations with people I might not agree with, where they're saying things that are really over the top and not loving. Have I just allowed that to be said and not said anything back and called them to the carpet on being a loving neighbor to them? And so questions that come up in my mind on that.
yeah. I think, and this is my opinion, I think we should be very careful about these triggering terms. I think they're loaded and um, they can be generally unhelpful. I'm very careful about how I use the word woke, honestly, but like, so it's called, some would call this radical reductionism, where whatever you see a problem in society, like some social issue, it's basically brought under the title of, "Oh, that's racism." Like, so if there's any type of injustice, there must be some type of systemic racism there that's causing this kind of injustice. And my point is, it could be racism. It really could be. I just think we need to be careful not to just throw that around. Anytime there's um, you know, a white person talking to a black person and there's a disagreement, the reason doesn't have to be racism. But that could be the trigger thing that could build sympathy in certain context, you know?
Mhm.
Um, the same can be true, to use a term like the political right will, like, they'll throw woke at anything. Like, I've been
Yeah.
called woke because it's just like, I just did a post the other day where I was just saying, like, "Hey, let's be careful of sweeping generalities that, like, assume people that are left politically, all have the same thought process, all have the same idea, all were celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk." I actually I wanted to do this. I actually was so excited to see the Obamas post on X, their sympathy, and abhorrence of the death of Charlie Kirk. They were just like, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the family." Now, I read some of the thread underneath, and people were like, "You probably are the one that caused this," or, "Is your politics that created this environment," whatever, whatever. And again, there's definitely some things I disagree with Obama politically, but I was like, I love that. I'm so glad that he was willing to speak, to build a bridge, and I think he did it. I think Bill Clinton. These are key representatives of the left, right? And Bill Clinton, he put us like, political violence is, should not be tolerated. I think then George Bush did a post too. Of course, he's on the right, but he did something like this, and I was like, that's what democracy should look like. Hey, we disagree on some of these fundamental issues, but political violence is unacceptable, and we're going to do whatever we can as a nation to put a stop to this kind of violence, and then people can rally. When we use rhetoric like, "Oh, this is us versus them," to an extreme, it creates a more rage-based kind of environment. And I almost kinda think too, like, there's a lot of outside sources, outside countries that would love to see, like, a place like America crumble. And I'm wondering if some of this rage bait type stuff is not even fed by some of that kinda dynamic because it's wild. Now that is definitely conspiracy. Got into some conspiracy
It
theory,
is,
but
yeah.
but
But hey,
I
you have
will
to
tell
throw a
you,
little bit of that in there.
I'll sprinkle it in a little bit, but man, as just, yeah, I think you're right. So I try not to when somebody says woke, I'm always like, "Is it really woke? And what do you mean by woke?" Because that term is so widely used. Racism, it could be, but is it? And see, that's you're leading back to our main topic of being courageous. Some of this, people will say, "You're not being courageous. You just need to stamp and fight." And I'm like, I'm not really sure you're fighting the right way, and I'm not gonna be coerced into your way of fighting. I wanna fight for what is true. I wanna have integrity. I wanna lead my family and those around me in a path forward that's not burying my head, that is standing up for truth, but yet I wanna do it in a way that ultimately, as you have done so skillfully through this conversation, is point us back to what is the ultimate ethic of Christianity? It's to love God and love our neighbor. And so, even my pursuit of truth is really to that end, you know? And, man, it's complicated.
Maybe I could
It's confusing.
mention,
Yeah.
well, I'd encourage everybody, one of the biggest impactor books for me outside of the Bible was the book Leadership and Self-Deception: How to Keep Oneself Out of the Box. And in that book, this is not a Christian book at all. It's about a company who goes and fixes business cultures. And basically, the point of the book is something to the effect of, I'm not going to give all of it to you, you got to go read it, but something to the effect of that you have to believe in something greater outside of yourself, that everybody that's truly good. It has to be truly good. And you have to believe that everyone's focus should be in that direction, and that you're not always right. The idea of self-deception is that you believe you're right and you're actually more interested in being right than everybody going towards the best goal together, what's good for everybody. Well, in that, the reason why that book impacted me so much was it unlocked my understanding of what Jesus was saying when he said, love God. Loving God is understanding the wisdom of God and having that relationship with God. So it's the highest moral. And what should that result in? Well, fixing of a business culture. They were saying, hey, if you do this thing, guess what? Your business culture will be fixed. They're helping Microsoft, they're helping Amazon, they're helping all the businesses with these concepts. But when you do this, you truly love your neighbor. And that's what
Yeah.
Christ was trying to say. And it totally unlocked the greatest commandment for me. E- As so I can't tell you how many times it's been business world, actually, my professional world, that has unlocked biblical truths for me in a different way that I've never seen before. But that was one of them. So that's a great book about fixing toxic cultures. But the point of the book, I thought, it was well said. They didn't say, hey, go look at the greatest commandment. That's my take on it. So, but that is how you fix a toxic culture. To get to beautiful, you have to seek truth. Truth is just. What is just is loving. And what is just and loving is good. And we can all agree that good is beautiful
Yes. Yeah. Amen.
and it's evident to all.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It was so good. I would say just kind of, I guess, in closing, this episode's gone long. This has been fun. I I do think if you're sitting there like, in summary, what does courage look like? One, you don't have to agree with Charlie Kirk on everything to say this was evil. And even if you're a Christian and you find some of his positions to be abhorrent to yourself, you're like, oh man, some of his stuff that he said was pretty offensive to me. Nothing wrong with having conversation about that, and even pointing that out. But don't allow someone's wrongness to stop you from valuing every every person's value as a human being, as a divine image bearer. And that's why I think the illustration is so helpful. If this was somebody who completely different values than mine, I think the right decision would be like, we need to stand up for what is right, for the right to speak. I disagree with what he was speaking, but he shouldn't have been killed for it. That's not the way forward. And that would be a good response regardless. Um, Play the long game. Like realize this is not going to be a quick fix. In jumping into the rage is not the rage baiting and fighting. That's not going to be the way forward. We need to be calm and collected. That doesn't mean that we don't have moments of anger and intensity, but it's just like we maintain our composure and we speak the truth. We don't bury our heads. You probably will find yourself, at least this is my experience. I find people on the extreme right saying I'm not saying it strong enough, or I'm emphasizing things that are not as important, maybe, swallowing the camel, straining on a gnat type of thing. But, just be
Yeah.
willing to have those conversations and just trust too. There are so many people in this country that they're looking for that voice. They're gravitating towards people that just have a nice, steady voice that says, "Hey, I don't have all the answers, but I want to pursue what is true, what is beautiful, and what is good." And I think of enough of us begin to emerge, then this is a interesting turning point in our culture that can be something that's beautiful. There's some dangers too, like on both sides, this hostility continues to increase. But I just think about what Christians do when it says in Proverbs, a soft answer turns away wrath. We want to be the peacemakers in culture. And that takes a lot of leadership and intentionality. So I'm actually going to get that book you mentioned, Keith. I'm not sure if I read it before. Is that an older book?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Early
I
2000s.
feel like I might have read it, but I need to pick it back up. Sounds fascinating. So thank you so much for joining in. Keith, do you have any closing bits of wisdom that you would like to leave us with? I put you on the
When
spot.
I've been thinking about this, when we lean into the light of what is true, what is just, what is loving, what is good, and what is beautiful, then we can find our way in the path of darkness.
Mm. Mm. So true. Well, thank you guys for joining in. Hopefully, this conversation will help you to live an intentional life. Thanks.